Chapter 21. What would Judy think of it? Part 1. When Pat went to Silverbridge in September to spend a few days with Aunt Hazel, she went willingly, for a brief exile from Silverbush was not so terrible as it used to be, and Aunt Hazel's home was a jolly place to visit. But when, just as the visit was nearly ended, word came that Cuddles and Sid were down with measles, and that Pat must not come home until all of danger of catching them was past, it was rather a cat of another color. However, what with one thing and another, Pat contrived to enjoy herself tolerably well and consoled herself in her spasms of homesickness by writing letters to everybody. The letter to Bets, with a border of dinky little black cats inked in all around it. Sweetheart Elizabeth, I think sweetheart is a tenderer word than darling, don't you? This is my birthday and your birthday, and isn't it a shame we can't spend it together? But even if we couldn't be together, I've been thinking of you all day and loving you. Aren't you glad our birthday is in September? I think it one of the nicest things that ever happened to me, because September is my favorite month in the year. It's such a friendly month, and it seems as if the year had stopped being in a hurry and had time to think about you. Bets, just think of it. We're 12. It seems such a short time since I was a child. And just think, our next birthday will be in our teens. Uncle Robert's maiden aunt said, once you are in your teens, the years just whirl by, and first things you know you're old. I can't believe we'll ever be old, Bets. Can you? I like it pretty well here. Aunt Hazel's place is lovely, but everything would be prettier if you could share it with me. The window in my room looks out on the orchard, and off to the left is a dear little valley all full of young spruces and shadows. I mean, the spruces are young, not the shadows. I think shadows are always old. They are lovely, but I think I am always a little bit afraid of them because they are so very old. Aunt Hazel laughed when I said this, and said notions like that were what came of Judy Plum stuffing us all with her yarns about fairies, and I don't think that has anything to do with it. It's just that shadows always seem to me to be alive, especially when moonlight and twilight are mixing. I go over the road to Uncle Robert's brother's house quite often to play with Sylvia Cyrilla Madison. I like that name. It has a nice, ripply, gurgly sound like a brook. She is a nice girl, but I can never like anyone as well as you, Bets. I like Sylvia Cyrilla, but I love you. Sylvia Cyrilla thinks Sid is very handsome. Somehow I don't like to hear her praise him. When her grown-up sister Maddie said the same thing, I was proud, but I hated to hear Sylvia Cyrilla say it. Why? Sylvia Cyrilla's big brother Bert told her I was a cute little ski-six, but probably he only said it out of politeness. Aunt Hazel is teaching me to make fudge and hemstitch. I like doing things like that, but Sylvia Cyrilla says it's old-fashioned. She says girls have to have a career now. She is going to have one, but I'm sure I don't want one. Somebody has to make fudge, and I notice Sylvia Cyrilla likes to eat it as well as anyone. Jen Campbell is Sylvia Cyrilla's dearest friend. She is good fun, but she doesn't like to be beaten in anything. When I said Sid and Cuddles had the measles, she said proudly, I had mumps and measles and scarlet fever and middle ear in 1 year, and now I have to get my tonsils out. It made me feel very inexperienced. Jen says she wishes she had been born a boy. I don't. Do you? I think it is just lovely to be a girl. I am writing this up in Aunt Hazel's garret, and it's raining. I love to be in a garret when it's raining, don't you? I love a sweet, rainy darkness like there is outside. The rain seems so friendly when it's gentle. Uncle Rob says I'm a regular garret cat, but the reason I like to be up here is because I can see the harbor from one window and Silverbush from another. From here, it just looks like a little white spot against the birch bush. I can't see your house, but I can see the hill of the mist, only it is north of me now instead of being east. That gives me a queer Alice in the Looking-Glass feeling. Tonight there are windy shadows flying over the harbor under the rain, like great long misty wings. It gives me a strange feeling when I look at them. It almost hurts me, and yet I love them. Oh, Bets, darling, isn't it lovely to be alive and see things like that? I am going to tell you a secret. I wouldn't tell it to anyone in the world but you. I know you won't laugh, and I can't bear to have secrets from you. I think I fell in love last Sunday night at 8 o'clock. Aunt Hazel took me to a sacred concert in Silverbridge given by 3 blind men. One played the piano, and one played the violin, and one sang. His singing was just heavenly, Bets, and he was so handsome. He had dark hair and a beautiful nose and the loveliest blue eyes, although he was blind. When he began to sing, I had such a queer sinking feeling at the pit of my stomach. I thought I must be getting religion, as Judy says, and then in a flash I knew what had happened to me because my knees were shaking. I asked Judy once how you could tell when you fell in love, and she said, "You'll find your legs trembling a bit." Oh, how I wished I could only do some splendid thing to make him notice me, or die for him. I was glad Aunt Hazel had scented my hands with toilet water before I left, and that I had on my blue dress and my little blue necklace, even if he couldn't see it. It would have been awful to fall in love if you had your old clothes on, or if you had a cold in the head like poor Sylvia Cyrilla. She was sniffing and blowing her nose all the evening. Oh, I shall never forget it, Bets, but the trouble is it didn't last. It was all over by Monday morning. That seemed terrible because Sunday night I thought it would last to all eternity as it says in books. I don't feel a bit like that about him now, though it makes me a little dizzy just to remember it. Am I fickle? I'd hate to be fickle. Won't it be lovely when I can go home and we can be together again? I'm crossing every day off on the calendar, and I pray every night that nobody else at Silverbush will take measles. Please don't read any poetry under the watching pine until I get back. I can't bear to think of you being there without me. I must go to bed now and get my beauty sleep, as Uncle Rob says. I like the words beauty sleep. Just suppose one could fall asleep ugly and wake up beautiful. That wouldn't seem so wonderful to you, darling, because you are beautiful, but poor me. It would be rather nice to have a blind husband because he wouldn't care if you weren't pretty. But I don't suppose I'll ever see him again. Think of me every moment you can. Your own Patricia. P.S. Aunt Hazel says I ought to get my hair bobbed. But what would Judy say? Part 2. The Letter to Mother. My own sweetest mother, I'm just making believe you're here, Mother, and that I'm feeling your arm around me. I'm just starving for you all. There is something pleasant about most of the days here, but you seem so far away at night. Do you miss me? And does Silverbush miss me? Dear Silverbush, when I came up to the garret tonight and looked to where it was all dead and dark, then it just came to life with lights in all its windows, and I thought I could see you all there, and Judy and Gentleman Tom, and I guess I cried a little. I was so glad to hear Sid and Cuddles were getting on all right. I hope Cuddles won't forget me. I'm glad you baked your letter in the oven so it wouldn't get germs in it, because it would be dreadful if it just when I was ready to go home, I'd come down with measles here. Mother dearest, I hope you don't have any of your bad headaches while I'm away. I read my chapter in the Bible every night, Mother, and say my prayers. Miss Martha Madison is here for a long visit. Uncle Robert calls her his maiden aunt behind her back, and you could just see the capitals. Every night she comes in and asks me if I've said my prayers. I don't like strangers meddling with my prayers. It will soon be a year since Dad came home from the West, but still every night I thank God for it. I just can't thank Him enough. Jen says she has cousins out there, and it's a splendid country. Likely it is, but it isn't Silverbush. There's one thing I do like here, Mother, the sheepskin rug by my bed. It's so nice to hop out of bed and dig your toes into a sheepskin rug, ever so much nicer than a cold oilcloth, or even a hooked mat. Can I have a sheepskin rug, Mother? That is, if it won't hurt Judy's feelings. I had a lovely letter from Bets today. Mother, I do love Bets. I'm so glad that I have such a beautiful friend. There is something about her voice makes me think of the wind blowing through the silver bush, and her eyes are like yours, always looking as if she knew something lovely. You are just the loveliest, Mother. I like writing letters because it's easier to write things like that than say them. Mother, can my new winter dress be red? I love soft glowing colors like red. Sylvia Cyrilla says she would like to have a new dress every month, but I wouldn't. I like to wear my clothes long enough to get fond of them. I hate to think that my last year's brown has got too small for me. I've had so many good times in that dear old dress. Mind you don't let Judy have any of my old things for hooking until I come home. I know she's got her eye on my yellow midi blouse, but you can lengthen the sleeves, can't you, Mother? There's a lovely moon rising over the harbor tonight, although the wind sounds a little sad around the garret. Judy says that when I saw the full moon one night, when I was 3 years old, I said, "Oh, see the man carrying a lantern in the sky?" Did I really? The maiden aunt says she likes lavender among sheets. When I said we always put sweet clover between ours, she sniffed. Aunt Hazel said yesterday I could make the brown Betty for dinner, but I couldn't do it right with the maiden aunt looking on and watching for mistakes, so it wasn't good, and I felt humiliated. But anyhow, I think brown Betty sounds too cannibalish. I think Sylvia Cyrilla's mother just worships her parlor. She keeps it locked up and the blind down, and only very special visitors ever get into it. I'm glad we live all over our house, Mother. The maiden aunt says there will be a frost tonight. Oh, I hope not. I don't want the flowers to be nipped before I get back. But I noticed today that the yellow leaves have begun to fall from the poplars, so the summer is over. I've just thrown a kiss out to the wind to carry to you, and I'm putting lots of kisses in this letter. A kiss for everybody and everything, and a special kiss for Father and Cuddles. Isn't it lucky love doesn't make a letter weigh any heavier? If it did, this letter would be so heavy I couldn't afford the postage. Aunt Hazel's new baby is very sweet, but not so pretty as Cuddles was. Oh, Mother, there really isn't anybody like the Silverbush people, is there? I think we're such a nice family, and you are the nicest person in it. Your devoted daughter, Pat. P.S. Aunt Hazel says I ought to have my hair bobbed. Do you think Judy would mind now? Sylvia Cyrilla says her mother cried for a week when she had hers bobbed, but she likes it now. P.G.
Part 3. Letter to Sid. Dearest Sid, I'm so glad to hear you are getting better and able to eat. The maiden aunt says you shouldn't be let eat much when you are getting over measles, but I guess Judy knows better than a maiden aunt. I hated to think you were sick, and me not there to fan your fevered brow or do a single thing for you. But I knew Judy would look after you if Mother couldn't spare time from Cuddles. I like it here. It's a nice friendly house, and Aunt Hazel lets me stay up till 9:30. But I will be glad when I can go home. I hope I won't take the measles, but I think it would be real exciting to be sick. They would make such a fuss over me then. When you get well, we must go back to our secret field and see how our spruces are. Sylvia Cyrilla says that Fred Davidson and his sister Muriel used to be devoted to each other just like you and me, but they quarreled, and now they never speak. Oh, Sid, don't let us ever quarrel. I couldn't bear it. Of course, they are only Davidsons. Sylvia Cyrilla says the South Glen Petersons got a bad scare last week. They thought Myrtle Peterson had eloped, but it turned out she was only drowned. And Sylvia says May Binney is your girl. She isn't, is she, Sid? You'd never have a Binney for a girl. They are not in our class. I wish you would marry Betts when you grow up. I wouldn't mind her coming to Silverbush. She would love it as much as I do, and I'm sure she'd make you a lovely wife, and she wouldn't mind living with you, I know. If the gray and white barn cat has kittens, tell Joe to save one for me. It will soon be plowing time. I'll be home in time to help pick the apples. Bert Madison is teaching me how to tie a sailor's knot, and I'll show you, but you won't show May Binney, will you, Sid? Your own dear sister, Pat. P.S. Aunt Hazel says I ought to have my hair bobbed. Do you think it would improve me? But what would Judy say? Part 4. Letter to Jingle. Dear Jingle, I was ripping for you to write me so often. I'm glad you missed me. Nobody at Silverbush have said they miss me. I supposed Sid and Cuddles were too sick too. And Winnie and Joe are so big now, I guess I don't matter much to them. I'm up in the garret. I like to sit here and watch the trees in the spruce valley getting black and listen to the wind moaning round the chimneys. Tonight it's the kind that Judy calls the ghost wind. It makes me think of that piece of poetry you read the last day we were in happiness. The midnight wind came wild and dread, swelled with the voices of the dead. Those lines always give me a lovely creepy shudder, Jingle, and I'm glad you feel it too. Sid thinks it's all bosh. He laughs at me when I wonder what is the meaning of the things the trees are always saying, and what some of the winds are always so sorry for. But you never laugh at me, Jingle. Every night here, before I go to sleep, I lie still and think I can hear the water falling over the mossy rock in dear happiness. How is McGinty? Give him a hug for me. The maiden aunt has a dog, but I'm sorry for it. She never lets it out of her sight, and the poor thing is nothing but a rubber rat to play with. They have several dogs at Sylvia Cirilla's, Bert's dog and Myrtle's dog and the family dog, but none of these are as nice as McGinty. Uncle Rob's father down the road has a dog, but he is not an exciting dog. Uncle Rob says he is always so tired he has to lean against the fence to bark. Speaking of dogs, I found such a lovely poem in Aunt Hazel's scrapbook called The Little Dog Angel. I cried when I read it because I thought of you and McGinty. I could just see McGinty slipping out of heaven's gate between St. Peter's legs to bark a welcome to you in the shivering dark. Oh, Jingle, I'm sure dear little dogs like McGinty must have souls. I wonder what you'd think of Aunt Hazel's house. I think you'd say it was too tall, but it's really very nice inside. Only there are no back steps to sit on, and no round window, and no dead clock. What do you think, Jingle? Old Mr. Peter Morgan from the harbor told me he was a pirate in his young days, and buried a treasure worth millions on the West Indies island, and never could find the place again. If he had told me that 4 years ago, I would have believed him, but he has left it too late. I wish it was as easy to believe things as it used to be. The fence back of Uncle Robert's house is the line between Queens and Prince County. It's perfectly thrilling, Jingle, to think you can go into another county just by climbing over a fence. Somehow you expect everything to be different. I climb over it every day just to get the nice adventure-y feeling. Aunt Hazel says it doesn't take much to give me a thrill, but I think it's lucky. What would life be without a few thrills? And what would life be without Beths and Jingles and Sids and Judys and Silverbushes? Chum Pat. P.S. Aunt Hazel thinks I ought to have my hair bobbed. Would you like me bobbed, Jingle?
Part 5. Letter to Judy, with Judy's comments. My own dear Judy, it just seems ages since I left home, and I've been so lonesome for you all and the dear old kitchen. Aunt Hazel's kitchen is very up to date, but it isn't as cozy as ours, Judy. When I get homesick at nights, I go up to the garret and watch the lights of Silverbush and picture out what everyone is doing, and I see you sitting bread in the kitchen, talking to yourself. Fancy that now? And Gentleman Tom thinking away on his bench. Sure, and it's the grand thing of your hour, Tom. I'm after telling the world you can think more in the day than most folks can in a week. They have no cats here because Uncle Robert's maiden aunt visits so often and so long, and she doesn't like them. I don't like the maiden aunt very well. Oh, small blame to you for that, Patsy. She is very homely. I know I'm not much to look at myself, but I haven't a nose like hers. Everything, even her hair, seems to be frightened of it and trying to get away from it. Sure, there's observation for you. And yet I'm a little sorry for her, Judy. Oh, the tender heart of her now. Because she really is lonely. She hasn't anybody or any place to love. That must be dreadful. Aunt Hazel has the loveliest blue quilt, quilted in fans, on her spare bed, and she has the rose mat you hooked for her on her living room floor. She's very proud of it, and points it out to everyone. Oh, so I'm getting my name up, it seems. She hasn't a parlor, or she would have put it there. It isn't fashionable to have parlors now, Sylvia Cyrilla says. I don't know what she'd say if she knew we had two. Sure, and who cares what she'd say? A parlor sounds far grander than a living room any day. Mother says I can have a new red dress this winter, Judy, and I hope she'll let me get a little red hat to go with it. Oh, but that would be real chic. Jen Davidson says she is going to have 2 new hats. She says the Davidsons always do. Well, you can't wear more than 1 hat at a time, can you, Judy? The philosophy of her. The maiden aunt sniffs when I talk of clothes, but Aunt Hazel says that it's because she can't afford them herself, and if Uncle Robert didn't help her out every year, she wouldn't have a stitch to her back. Sure, and folks don't be wanting many stitches to their backs nowadays, judging by the fashion books I've been seeing. Oh, Judy dear, the maiden aunt says it isn't right to tell fairy tales, not even that there is a Santa Claus. Set her up with it. But I'm going to keep on believing in fairy rings and horseshoes over the doors and witches on broomsticks. It makes life so thrilling to believe in things. If you believe in a thing, it doesn't matter whether it exists or not. Sure, and she could argue a Philadelphia lawyer down the darling. We don't have any eating between meals here, Judy. I guess it's healthier, but when bedtime comes, I do think of your eggs and butter. I think a snack at bedtime is healthy. Sure, and all sensible people do be thinking the same. But Aunt Hazel is a good cook. She can make the loveliest ribbon cake. I wish you would learn to make ribbon cake, Judy. Oh, your ribbon cake, is it? I'm too old a dog to be learning your new millinery tricks. But her cranberry pies aren't as nice as yours, Judy. They're too sweet. Oh, the blarney of the creature. She's after wanting to put me in the good humour. Sylvia Cyrilla's mother can make lovely Devonshire cream. Devonshire cream, is it? I could make Devonshire cream before she was born or thought of. But will you be telling me where the cream is to be coming from with every drop of milk sent off to the cheese factory? But she isn't a good cook in other ways. Her things look all right, but something always tastes wrong. Not enough salt, or too much, or no flavoring, or something like that. No gumption, me jewel, that's the trouble. No gumption. Sylvia Cyrilla's father's cousin in Charlottetown tried to cut his throat last week, but Sylvia Cyrilla says he didn't succeed, and they took him to the hospital and sewed him up. Alvin Sutton, that would be, sure, and none of the Stuttons I've ever made a good job of anything they undertook. Aunt Hazel's father-in-law and mother-in-law live up the road a piece, Mr. and Mrs. James Madison. I often go up on errands. Mr. James has no use for me because I can't eat a plate of porridge. He says it's a dish for a king, but I'm not a king. Porridge, is it? Sure, and I'm not running down porridge, but skinny old Jim Madison isn't after being much of an advertisement for it. They are very proud of their oldest daughter, Mary. She is an M.A. and won some great scholarship and is a teacher in a college. I suppose it's nice to be so clever, Judy. Oh, but I'm not hearing of her getting a man, though. Mr. James likes to tease his wife. When Sylvia Cyrilla's father asked him if he would get married over again, he laughed and said yes, but not to the same woman. Mrs. James didn't laugh, though. Oh, she was after knowing it might be half fun and whole earnest. They say Mr. James was very wild when he was young, but he says if he hadn't been, there'd be no stories to tell about him now. He'd be nothing but a dull old grandfather. I've been collecting stories ever since I've been here, Judy, so that I'll have lots to tell when I'm old like you. There is one about a ghost on a farm belonging to Sylvia Cyrilla's uncle who has whiskers. I mean, the ghost has whiskers. Isn't that funny? Can you imagine a ghost with whiskers? Sure, and I knew a ghost in old Ireland with a bald head. There is no accounting for the freaks of the creatures. and Jen Davidson had a cousin who always cried when he was drunk. I thought it was because he was sorry he was drunk, but Jen says it was because he couldn't get drunk oftener. Old Mr. McAllister from the bridge was up to see Mr. James last Monday and said he would have been up Sunday, only he was wrestling with Satan all day. Do you suppose he really was, Judy? Or was he just speaking poetically? Oh, I'm guessing he must have been trying to keep on good terms with his wife. She'd quarrel with a feather bed, that one. Sure, and he only married her by accident. When he proposed to her, he was expecting her to say no, and when she said yes, poor Johnny McAllister got the surprise of his life. His brother was a dreadful man and died shaking his fist at God. You couldn't be expecting a McAllister to have any manners, even on his deathbed, Patsy darling. The Maltby brothers have made up their quarrel after never speaking for 30 years. I don't think they're half as interesting now. Uncle Rob says they've made up because they've forgotten what they quarreled about, but if anybody could remember it, they'd start all over again. And Mr. Gordon Keyes at the bridge keeps his wife in order by crocheting lace whenever she won't do as he says. She hates to see him do it, and so she gives in. The funniest story I've collected so far is this. Several years ago, old Sam Mackenzie was very sick in Charlottetown, and everybody thought he was going to die. He was very rich and prominent, so Mr. Trotter, the undertaker, knew the family would want a fine coffin for him, and he imported an extra fine one right off to have it ready because it was a very cold winter, and he was afraid the strait might freeze over any day. And then old Sam went and got better, and poor Mr. Trotter was left with that expensive coffin on his hands, and nobody liked to buy it. But he kept quiet, and one day a few months afterwards, old Tom Ramsey, who was rich and prominent too, dropped dead when nobody expected him to. And Mr. Trotter told the family he had just one coffin on hand that was good enough, and they took it. So old Tom Ramsey was buried in Sam Mackenzie's coffin. The secret leaked out, and after a while the Ramseys were furious, but they couldn't unbury him. That is the funniest story, but the nicest is about old Mr. George McFadden, who died 4 years ago and went to heaven. At first he couldn't find any islanders, but after a while he found out there were lots of them, only they had to be kept locked up for fear they would try to get back to the island. Mr. James Madison told me that, but he wouldn't explain how he found out about Mr. McFadden's experience. Anyway, I'm sure I'd feel like that, Judy. If I went to heaven, I'd want to get back to Silverbush. I was afraid when it blew so hard last night some of our trees would blow down. If Joe saves a kitten for me, be sure you give it some cream, Judy. Jen Davidson has an aunt that has been married 4 times. Oh, the lies. She must have been enough for telling the men that one. Jen seems proud of her, but Uncle Rob says she ought to be more economical with husbands when there isn't enough to go round. I think he said that to tease the maiden aunt. Madge Davidson is going to marry Crofter Carter. Sure, and she's a bit shopworn, or she wouldn't be after looking at him. I've seen a Davidson wouldn't walk on the same side of the road as a Carter. Ross Halliday and Miranda Bailey at Silverbridge are married. They were engaged for 15 years. I suppose they got tired of it. Sure, and Miranda Bailey always said she wouldn't marry till she got used to the thought of it. She was always a bit soft in the head, that one. But the men seemed to like that sort, I'm telling you. She never had any looks but kissing goes be favour, and if Ross is the happy man, at least it isn't Judy Plum that'll grudge him to it. Mrs. Samuel Carter is dead, and the funeral is Friday. They've had a terrible lot of funerals there, Sylvia Cyrilla says, but Mr. Carter says funerals are not as expensive as weddings when all is said and done. And that's no dream when you have to support your son-in-laws as Sam Carter has, I'm telling you. I hope you won't be tired reading this long letter, Judy. I've written some of it every day for a week, and just put down everything that came into my head. I'll soon be home now, and we can talk everything over. Don't let anybody change any of the furniture about when I'm away. If this letter is bulgy, it's just because I've put so many hugs in it for you. Your loving, Patsy. P.S. Aunt Hazel says she thinks my hair would grow darker if it was bobbed. Do you think it would, Judy? P. Sure, and it's the good letter she does be writing. It's the lonesome place around here without the little dancing fate and the dear laugher of her. that way she has of smiling at ye, as if there was some nice little joke atween ye'll carry her far. But next year will be lashings of time to talk of bobbing, sure, and I must be putting this letter in me glory box.